In the UPA's first tenure, he tried to give the ailing India Post a new lease of life as the Minister of State for Communication and IT. Now, in his second innings, he's trying to further the cause of India's industrialization as the Minister of State for Commerce and Industry. With inflation raging, interest rates moving up, FDI declining, Scindia has his task cut out for him. Many thanks for joining us on the Budget Report Card. Let me start by asking you about how concerned you're feeling about the health of the Indian economy. And I'm not going to ask you about the GDP number because that's a given. But if we look at the IIP numbers, and one can quibble about the volatility in the data, the accuracy of the data, but the fact of the matter is that IIP for 2 consecutive months has declined and declined significantly. How concerned is your ministry feeling at this point?
Macro, Shireen, we are quite positive on the Indian economy. I do not think that keep apart India, I don't think globally any other economy is going to see the growth rates that we are going to be experiencing, between 8–8.5% GDP growth rates. But that being said, I think it's very important from a fundamental aspect to look at, for me, what are very important barometers is greater amount of investment, greater amount of capital going into the economy to put in place capacity for the future. And that is something that is slightly worrying at this point of time. As far as the IIP numbers are concerned, please don't forget also that we are coming off a very high base as of last year. And I don't think that we need to concentrate on blips, but really looking at a trend. The trend, say for these blips? The trend, say for these 2 months, has been very, very positive. I am quite confident that we will come out of this trough. It is not something that is, it is a little disconcerting to say the least. But I am quite confident that we will see a rise in those numbers.
Okay, you know, Anand Sharma has written to the Prime Minister saying that a rate hike is not warranted at this point in time. In fact, a rate hike will only hurt industry. The Reserve Bank has no option, given the fact that inflation continues to soar. It's in fact the #1 enemy that both the government as well as the central bank are battling. In this context, you know, how do you actually see this impacting industry, and what kind of a dampener is it going to be on industrial growth?
It is a concern from the point of view of the Commerce and Industry Ministry. It's very important right now to put in place capacity for the future, to bring in investment, to bring in a new amount of capital, and therefore any rate hike, however small it might be, will suck capital out of the market. So it is a degree of concern for us. But on a macro scale, inflation is a huge bugbear. But what we have to understand is that inflation is coming much more from the supply side as opposed to the demand side, point 1. Point 2, it's coming much more from primary articles.
Would you admit that the government has handled the inflation problem poorly?
No, I would not, because I think the government...
You can't blame everything on the external environment.
You could say that if it was something within the ambit of the government.
Okay.
There have been international
presses... Did the government not know about the unseasonal rainfall? Did the government not know? Why is it that onion prices in Nashik have now halved after, after the government has actually intervened?
You have to understand, Shireen, that there are certain issues which, on a demand-supply analysis basis, is out of the purview of the government. If international prices cross... Take the example. Take the example.
Prices,
it is because take the example of oil. Crude was almost about $55 a barrel 3 months ago. It's now almost $100 a barrel, right? So therefore, your oil import bill is going to go up hugely. So the same as far as primary articles are concerned.
Let me bring up an issue that you just talked about, and that really is bringing in investment into this country. If you look at the numbers for foreign direct investment, inflows are actually declining. We've seen a drop of about 35% in FDI inflows in 2010. This was the big agenda as far as the UPA was concerned, bringing in foreign direct investment. What's gone wrong? How concerned are you? Have you spoken about this with other members of your cabinet? Are you taking this matter up to the Prime Minister? What kind of intervention can we see in order for us to see FDI inflows pick up?
Yes, it is a matter of huge concern for us, and I think the next rise in FDI will only come through a greater amount of opening up in the FDI arena. There are 2 or 3 areas or 3 or 4 areas that are today under our ambit in terms of what we are looking at. Retail, defense being a couple of those. We are progressing those in terms of consultations within ministries. and I'm sure we will hopefully see some traction in this fiscal on both those areas. Defense is slightly trickier, but I think on retail, hopefully we should see a greater amount of traction in the next coming months.
You said this fiscal, so you anticipate a forward movement on retail by the end of March?
I think this fiscal, meaning I always when I guess I'm putting on my putting on my investment banking hat, and we talk about this fiscal, you're talking about 11-12, right?
Because we had exactly the same conversation the same time last year. The DIPP put up a consultation paper. Every stakeholder that is interested in this sector has actually written about it. Various ministries have put in their points of view. The Agriculture Ministry wants a complete opening up of the sector, we understand. The Chief Economic Advisor says that the government is being forced to look at opening up this space at this point. The Planning Commission supports an opening up. So why is this being held up, and where is it being held up? Because there's all sorts of reports suggesting that it's a week away from the cabinet. Where do things actually stand as far as FDI and retail is concerned?
Thank you for a wonderful articulation of the process. I have to thank you for that. I couldn't have done it better. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. We finished doing this process in December. The report was submitted. The Ministry of Agriculture, the Chief Economic Advisor is heading this committee. The report was submitted by them to us in mid-end of December. And as I said, in the next couple of months, you will see traction on this front. I believe that on a macro basis, FDI and retail, and I don't want to characterize it as retail, it's really back end to front end.
Sure.
But having said that, there are issues within the political structure that we're dealing with, but I think you will see traction on that in the next couple of months.
All right, you talked about defense as well, and this is another area where there's been a lot of back and forth on how much it should be opened up, where the cap should actually be. You said this is trickier than retail, which I found surprising, but where do things currently stand as far as defense is concerned, and why is it trickier than retail?
Well, today you have 100% equity participation as far as Indian entrepreneurs are concerned. You have 26% as far as FDI is concerned. The key issue from a national viewpoint is that even today we import 70% of our defense equipment. For me as an Indian, what is extremely important is not only procuring defense equipment, but really transfer of technology. Because that's when you will see real value addition and India coming up the technology curve. That's the thought process behind going forward with that discussion paper that we've put forward.
Right.
We are in the process of collating opinion on that. We are talking with the Defense Ministry on that issue. So we'll have to take sure steps, but probably slower steps in terms of building a consensus, and we're in the process of doing that.
You know, the countries that are bringing FDI in at this point in time, China, Singapore, are countries that are betting big on infrastructure. India has hoped to bet big on infrastructure, but we've run into all sorts of problems. How concerned is your ministry with things like environmental clearances or the lack of environmental clearances? POSCO, back and forth for over 5 years now. Hopefully by the end of this month we are going to see a positive outcome on that. But how much of that is a concern, a worry, and how much of that is impacting FDI inflow?
Well, I think it is a concern because when multinationals or big companies, and when I say multinationals, I mean even Indian multinationals, because now we are on the world stage.
That's right.
Make plans for investment, they need surety of process and policy. That being said, I think Jairam Rameshji has very clearly articulated that as far as POSCO is concerned, within the next week, end of this month, he will be making an announcement. The problem is that prior to this, probably there was not a assiduous following of policy.
Right.
And I think Mr. Jairam Ramesh has put that process in place. But I think it's important to, as far as big ticket projects are concerned, to put in place a very clear and transparent process, which he's probably trying to do today, so that you have a roadmap in terms of where you're going.
Nobody is debating that, and everybody obviously wants to maintain the environmental integrity of this country. I don't think anybody quibbles about that. The fact of the matter is that we're talking about retrospective action. We're talking about 5-6 year delays. We're talking about 40,000 crore rupees being invested and then being told that, hey, you know, your project isn't being given a go-ahead because of environmental clearances.
I want to point out one thing here. He has raised the issue fair and square. We have raised the issue with the Environment Ministry as well.
What is the issue that you've raised?
In the sense that we need to have a clear roadmap of procedures and policies in place, so that you can have a greater amount of capital investment. And I think Mr. Jairam Ramesh also understands our point of view, and he's also very clearly articulated that in his recent statement with regard to POSCO.
So is there a target that you have set yourself in terms of where you would actually like to see FDI inflows? We understand that by the end of March we are going to see another comprehensive review of the FDI sort of regulations. That was a promise that was made in the budget. What's left to be done and what can we really expect?
I really believe in realistic and achievable targets. And I would say that over the next 5 years, if we look at a runway of 35 to 40 billion per year, so roughly about 200 billion in FDI, I would like to exceed that. But at this point of time, that's the target I would put to myself.
Scams, corruption, all of that business. How difficult is the investment environment looking?
You've so wonderfully articulated doomsday for us.
I'm not articulating doomsday.
Yeah, you have. You just have.
Realistic.